money to create a compensation fund. Isaacson says the popularity of Argo is helping.
A lot of people have seen it. They understand the abject horror that these people went through. Hopefully it will give us the impetus and the momentum to see to it that after all these many years, they're actually compensated for their treatment.
His bill would allow hostages to get $10,000 a day for each day of captivity, $4.4 million total for each hostage. Isaacson argues finally compensating the hostages is critical to send a message to Iran and to U.S. personnel in harm's way all around the world, especially after 4 were killed in the U.S. consulate in Libya.
They need to also know that if they get violated, if they are captured, if they are tortured, that we'll have their back.
This is me, with the dorky glass. You see the dorky glass?
Well, very cool in the 70s indeed. Even after John Lindbergh was held captive for 14 months, he returned to the Foreign Service for the rest of his career. He now has a comfortable life. He says he is not fighting for the money, but for justice.
It's about accounting for it, to hold people responsible for what they did. Because the message so far, frankly, has been to the Islamic Republic, you got away with it.
Now, this bill to help get Lindbergh and other former hostages that justice still needs to go through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It's still kind of in its infancy, but the idea does appear to have momentum. And Open Case, that is definitely something new. He told me that before the movie Argo came out, people would listen to him, and that changed.
Does the State Department have a position on this?
They definitely say that they're going to stick with the Algiers Accords, meaning they agree that the U.S. nobody can sue Iran, but they say that they're looking at this legislation. That's interesting, but do you think this actually could go through? It is entirely possible. It is now bipartisan, and of course that needs to happen before anything can get through.
That's a good idea for Senator Isaacson. Dennis, thanks very much. That's it for us. Thanks very much for watching. Aaron Burnett, our friend, starts right now.
Next, North Korea cuts all military communication with the South and says a simmering nuclear war could break out at any moment. Plus, a new development in the movie theater massacre. Should James Holmes be spared the death penalty? And is the Defense of Marriage Act about to be a goner? What we can tell from the questions the Supreme Court justices asked today. Let's go outside. Burnett, out front tonight, killing the hotline. North Korea has cut all military communication with South Korea. Tensions between the two countries tonight at the brink. The North says a war could break out at any moment, saying the conditions are in place for a, quote, simmering nuclear war. Today, the United States denounced the move.
We think their latest threat to cut off communication links, coupled with its provocative rhetoric, is not constructive to ensuring peace and stability on the peninsula.
North Korea packs serious punch. Its military has an unknown number of nuclear weapons, as many as 800 short and long-range ballistic missiles, and 1.2 million fighting troops, all dangerously close to the 30,000 American soldiers stationed in South Korea. U.S. officials today talked about North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un saying, quote, North Korea is not a paper tiger. It wouldn't be smart to dismiss its provocative behavior as pure bluster. This is serious. And out front tonight, Matthew Chance. He's on the island of Yongchung, which is just miles away from a potential North Korean military strike. And Matthew, how big of a step is the move today to sever the military hotline?
Well, they've done that before, but it's still a pretty big step. Remember, there are more than 1 million troops facing off against each other across one of the most volatile borders in the world, and so there are very few channels of communications between those two militaries. And so when one of them is severed like this, obviously it increases the possibility of a miscalculation, of a misstep that could potentially escalate into something more serious. And that's one of the big concerns now. There's so little trust between the two sides, so little opportunity for them to communicate and coordinate. That could lead to something very dangerous indeed, Aaron.
And Matthew, some people might say, well, what were these hotlines really used for? If they were only for emergencies, maybe they weren't really used, so maybe this isn't that important. Were they regularly using this line?
Yeah, well, this line in particular used on an almost daily basis. It's a hotline between the two militaries in an area called the Kaesong industrial complex. It's a sort of free trade trade zone, which was set up as a sort of rare economic bridge between North and South Korea. And so it's obviously going to have an impact on that. It may even disable that economic zone altogether and prevent South Korean workers from going across the border into the zone into North Korea. So it could have a really big impact economically and on the security situation on the ground, Eric.
Matthew Chance, thank you very much, reporting live from the island of Yongtong tonight. Well, the United States has more than 50,000 troops in the region of North Korea. Congressman Ed Royce is the chairman of the House Foreign Relations Committee, and he is out front tonight. And good to see you, sir. Appreciate your taking the time. Why do you think we are seeing what seems to be such incredibly quick escalation happening right now?
Well, I think the young man Kim Jong-un, who has taken control of North Korea, is himself very aggressive. And you have the election of a new female president, Madam Park, who I met with a little over a month ago in South Korea. Remember, these provocations have been pretty constant, and Madam Park's own mother, when she was young, was assassinated by the North Koreans, by a North Korean sniper in South Korea. So they are used to dealing with provocative behavior. They had one of their warships blown up not too many years ago.
Right.
Lost 40 sailors. And so they're used to the shelling of their islands and so forth, and this kind of provocation. At times when the North Korean leadership attempts to flex its muscle and use its power. What's unusual, though, is that now we have North Korea developing not only three-stage ICBMs, but having nuclear capability, nuclear weapons.
Right.
And they're looking to miniaturize those and be able to put them on an ICBM, which would be a game changer. And this, of course, is of concern to the United States.
That's right. In addition, North Korea cut the phone line, as we just reported. They've done, as you know, 3 nuclear tests recently, and they've test-fired a long-range missile. And then, of course, there's a video in the past few weeks that we've been showing our viewers. The White House, the Capitol in New York, is going up in flames after a North Korean attack. Pentagon spokesman George Little says we take their rhetoric seriously, and if you look at what they said recently, it's been extremely provocative, threatening, and bellicose. What would you do beyond saying what George is saying?
Well, two things that the United States is doing right now. One is we're bringing more interceptors online in terms of California and in Alaska in order to have the capability if there were ever a rogue launch from North Korea. They're not to the point yet where they can miniaturize their ICBMs. I would suggest before they get that capability of putting a weapon on an ICBM, that we go back to what we did in 2005 when we were confronted by provocative behavior. They were then counterfeiting our $100 bills, and the U.S. Treasury Department froze the bank accounts. It froze the accounts in the Bank of Delta Asia and other banks that were being used for hard currency by North Korea, which suddenly meant that not only could the dictator not pay his generals, but he also couldn't continue the production lines on his missile program. I think it's frankly time. New sanctions are being put in place, but we ought to put those types of sanctions that briefly were put in place in 2000. A lot of activity in North Korea, and he wants to do that before they get the nuclear weapons.
Well, it's an interesting point because this month, the National Security Advisor, Tom Donilon, talked about the North Korean situation. Here's what he had to say exactly.
The United States will not accept North Korea as a nuclear state, nor will we stand by while it seeks to develop a nuclear missile that can target the United States.
What amazes me about that is, of course, North Korea already is a nuclear state, and they already are seeking to arm weapons that could come and strike the United States. They've done all this, Chairman, despite sanctions from the United States that have been in place since 1950. And I just wonder what you think about that. If you're another country and you say, look, isn't the lesson here that you should do whatever you need to do to get a nuke? Because once you have one, the United States is pretty much powerless against you.
Well, here's the problem. The problem is that what we have done since the 94 framework agreement is not put the types of sanctions, financial sanctions, on North Korea except for 2005 when we took the Treasury's advice. And as a result...
So you think if we had done those sanctions, it would have really worked? Because, of course, when they first got a nuclear weapon, at least the reports I've seen, was 2006, after those sanctions, of course, and under President George W. Bush.
We talked to defectors who had worked on their missile program. I talked to their top propaganda minister who defected through China. They all indicated that the regime, if it's faced with those types of sanctions, cannot get the hard currency and cannot sustain the support. And so I would go back to what was tried briefly in 2005 because it just cuts off the flow of the hard currency they need to pay the army to do their weapons buildup. None of that money comes back into the country to help the people in the countryside. I've been in North Korea. They're all fending for themselves. The money goes into their weapons programs, and that's why it should be curtailed, and that's why those bank accounts should be shut down.
All right, well, thank you very much, Chairman. We appreciate your time, and of course, we're going to be following that to see if sanctions will be enough, or if the United States will have to do more, and if the U.S. is willing to do more. Still to come is the alleged Colorado movie theater shooter about to avoid the death penalty, plus paying big bucks for a Picasso. Elbows are being thrown, literally, over this one. And same-sex marriage hangs in the balance, why some people think the Supreme Court is going to overturn the Defense of Marriage Act. And one of the most incredible, probably the most incredible bus crashes you will ever see.
Biscuit company, but Dan wanted more, so Fast Signs created a plan to raise Dan's business visibility. Now Dan has more sales, more stores, more of the good life, and more is what Fast Signs delivers. More than fast, more than signs. Oh, hi there, Bill. Hey, are you going to gather another meeting? Yep, I brought a business trip out of the family time. My family, this is Joe. Hi there. Earn a ton of extra points with the Double Your Honors promotion. And feel the antonality.
Don't think I should have to wait for it. What do you think I am? Quicken Loans?
At Quicken Loans, we won't make you wait for it. Our efficient online system allows us to get you through your home loan process fast, which means you'll never have to beg for a quick close date. One more way Quicken Loans is engineered to amaze. Marcus, look at me and talk to you.
Same pool. But, two prices. Why pay more? Do the Trivago check. On Trivago, you always find the perfect deal for 500,000 hotels and over 100 different websites. Just select your ideal hotel, and Trivago shows you where to book at the best price. Hotel, Trivago.
Our second story out front, plea deal. Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting suspect James Holmes is now offering a guilty plea in exchange for life in prison instead of the death penalty. Prosecutors, though, haven't accepted the deal, and they say they may still go for the death penalty. In the shooting rampage last July in
the theater. He then enters the theater with a shotgun, fires a shot into the ceiling so people will look up, and then he walks around with his Glock and his Smith & Wesson automatics with high-capacity magazines, meticulously killing one person after another after another. In the end, 12 dead, 58 injured. We're not done yet, though. He booby-traps his apartment, so when the police find out where he is, first man through the door would have been cut in half by the explosives. Does he deserve the death penalty? Yes, he does. He probably deserves to die slowly. The crime was so horrific.
And do you agree?
Well, no, I mean, this is the case. In Colorado, the government has to prove that he's sane beyond a reasonable doubt. That's unlike many, many states. That's going to be impossible. I mean, the question of what he deserves isn't really the question here. The question is legally what's going to happen. And he's got a psychiatric history. We know his guy was the Joker. I mean, the red hair. I mean, all these different things where he's acting insane. And he has a diagnosis. He's been evaluated. So can they show he's sane beyond a reasonable doubt? The answer is no. So then the next question is, what do they do about that? Because
Let me just ask you a question there to follow up on that, because you're saying it's not about what he deserves, and I understand there's a legal issue, but for many, this is more than that. This is human life. Tom Tees, his father, Alex, he's the father of a man named Alex, a young man who was in that theater, who was killed. I've talked to Tom recently, and I asked him what he thought about the death penalty for James Holmes. Here's what he said.
It is a struggle, to be honest with you, but I don't want that man on the street going out and killing your child, because he will do it again. When they talked about the people, he could have cared less. They were objects to him.
And can you tell a father like that he shouldn't get the death?
You know, my heart goes out to this father and everybody affected. It's a horrible case. And your visceral reaction is that you want James Holmes to die. But here's the problem. If they go to trial, the state, and he's acquitted by reason of insanity, then he's going to go to a mental institution and get out potentially. No, he's not going to be acquitted. To establish that you are legally insane, you have to not understand the nature and consequences of your acts, and there are so many planning issues here. This was a meticulously planned group of homicides over a lengthy period of time. And by the way, most killers who commit crimes like this have an element of mental illness. I mean, as a matter of fact, they'd all be going to mental hospitals if they got off because they color their hair red and act strangely. This is a case, however, you can't make out insanity because of the meticulous planning that went into the homicide. So I think prosecutors are going to win this case. Well, you know, but the thing is also, it's not what I was going to say also, it's not just insanity at the trial. You're not going to kill a mentally ill person. And so in the death penalty phase and on mitigation and everything else, you've got two things to get over as a prosecutor, but also, this is Colorado. I mean, they've got the burden of proof. And I mean, can you prove he is sane when he's got diagnoses out there and he acted in a fashion that would be commensurate with a finding of insanity? You know, and somebody does some funny. That's not the whole equation. You know very well that there's a major difference between legal insanity and clinical insanity. There are lots of mentally ill people who are walking around with a diagnosis of mental illness. That doesn't mean they're legally insane. And he is going to be, it's very easy to prove that he was sane at the time of this crime.
Isn't it true that, I mean, we could all assume as citizens of this country that anybody who did something like this, anybody who does these kinds of mass shootings is mentally ill the way we would define it. But if the court would define it in a way that would get you out of the death penalty, isn't the burden for that a lot higher?
Well, the bottom line is, in Colorado, it's one of the easiest defenses to prove, which is you don't have the two-part McNaughton test, which is kind of hard to show insanity. He's already been shown to be insane. The fact is, the prosecutors can't prove that he's sane. He's just like Jared Loughner, or look at also in Newtown shootings with Adam Lanza. I mean, you have all these individuals that are schizophrenic, that they act in a fashion that's almost exactly like the person did, that gave a basis for Sahara, but